Welcome back. Today we're talking about do anti-wrinkle creams work? Now that sounds weird. Why would we discuss anti-wrinkle creams? Because we're not going to discuss whether a specific anti-wrinkle cream works. What we're going to discuss is, as a concept, do anti-wrinkle creams work? Are they likely to work?
This is the Darshan Talks podcast, regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com.
Obviously, all the standard disclaimers are in there. There's not legal advice, non-medical advice, or any of those things. Just educational. So I also want to be clear. It's scientifically impossible to prove a negative. So just to be clear, we're not going to try to prove a negative. So if there's a 1 in a billion chance that something's going to work, maybe. But that's not what we're going after. We're saying, for the most part, here's what companies have to do to prove that their anti-wrinkle creams work or the anti-aging cream works, and whether or not that's likely to work. So let's start from the beginning. Drugs are defined as articles that are intended for use, and that's the key piece, intended for use in the diagnosis, cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease, and as articles intended to affect the structure or function of the body of man or animals. So the key piece that this whole thing turns over is the intention for use. So all drugs, there must be two things and there must not be two things. So they must be safe and efficacious. So they must work and they must be safe. And they must not be adulterated or misbranded. So what does that actually mean? That means that you can't actually have a product that has gook in it and disgusting stuff in there. That's probably not the direction you want to go. I guess the word's goop. It must not be misbranded in that you can't advertise it for something that it's not intended for. On the other hand, cosmetics are defined as articles intended to be rubbed, poured, sprinkled, sprayed on, introduced into, or otherwise applied to the human body for cleansing, beautifying, promoting attractiveness, or altering the appearance. Some examples obviously are skin lotions, perfumes, lipsticks, fingernail polishes, etc., etc., etc. The key piece here is that unlike drugs which are intended to be safe and efficacious, there's no such requirement for cosmetics. They, however, must not be adulterated or misbranded. So, cosmetic products and ingredients do not actually even need FDA pre-market approval except for like color additives. So FDA can pursue enforcement and can go after these companies if they're not compliant with the law, but that is after the fact. So in general, except for color additives and those ingredients that are prohibited or restricted by regulation, a manufacturer may use any ingredient in the formulation for cosmetics. So as long as it's labeled or customary for the customary conditions of use, as long as it's properly labeled, and as long as it's not deemed to be adulterated or misbranded. So the key piece, again, going back, is the focus on intent. The intent is determined by looking at the claim or statement made by or on behalf of a manufacturer that explicitly or implicitly promotes a product for the particular use and any circumstances surrounding the distribution of the product. So essentially, the idea is that if your cosmetic comes in and you give a book that says this cosmetic is really used to cure cancer, well, just because it's not on your actual product doesn't mean that it's not being intended for use in a specific way. Or if you tell influencers, there's this whole discussion right now around Instagram and influencers, if you're telling influencers to promote your product in a way that is non-compliant, that would be problematic as well. So claims stated on the product labeling and advertising may be drugs or devices depending on how it's set up. You could also look at consumer perception and talking to the consumers and asking why they're buying it. Each of those would go towards the intent. So what about approval? Don't these products need to be approved? No. Cosmetics do not need to be approved to get onto the market, except for certain considerations. But what about cosmeceuticals, right? Except from the FDA's perspective, there's no such thing as a cosmeceutical. It can be a cosmetic, it can be a drug, and it may even be both. But being both is a very different thing than specifically being a cosmeceutical. If it's a prescription drug, there are a bunch of different rules. If it's an OTC drug, it would probably go down the monograph pathway, and there are no OTC drugs for anti-aging right now. So then why does the FDA allow these claims? The FDA doesn't regulate cosmetics claims. The FTC actually regulates cosmetics claims. And the FTC requires that you have what's called competent and reliable scientific evidence. So what does that actually mean? You need to have tests, analyses, research, studies, or other evidence based on the expertise of professionals in the relevant area that has been conducted and evaluated in an objective manner by persons qualified to do so, yielding procedures generally accepted in the profession to yield accurate and reliable results. So the key piece is accurate and reliable, but it's not conclusive. So the idea being that you could have mouse tests that suggest that if you introduce this cream, some wrinkles might reduce. Well, first of all, are you really going down and basing yourself based on a mouse? That doesn't work. It doesn't work in drugs, and it's not necessarily as predictive as one might want. So just because it suggests that it might work doesn't necessarily mean that it does work. The second piece of it is that it's an extremely low standard. You have very little proof that's actually required. In fact, a lot of the cosmetics companies have recently come out and said, FDA, we need more requirements, we need more regulations, because this is problematic. People are coming in making all kinds of claims. So in the case of cosmetics, the claims are primarily enforced by the industry, not by the FTC. So the industry is not necessarily incentivized to stop its own gravy train. So it's literally the fox guarding the hen house, and that's problematic. So as a general rule, taking that away, do anti-aging cosmetics work? No. For the most part, there's not enough proof suggesting that they do. If they have that proof, they haven't submitted to the FDA. If they have that proof, they haven't put it out there. If they have that proof, there's not enough to suggest that as a general rule, it's going to work. So should you spend the $100 for a cosmetic cream that has very little proof that it works? That's up to you. That's your decision. However, from a regulatory standpoint, there's not enough evidence behind that. But it works for me. Well, that's just called a placebo effect. Sorry. So what about if the product is still on the market? Isn't that a good thing? So there's a big difference between the product is still in the market and that it actually works. The FDA has only limited resources. It can only go after so many things at a time. It has to prioritize its goals. Going after $100 cosmetics is not as high on its cosmetics on its enforcement list as, say, drugs that might be affecting people's lives. And the amount of proof that's required to make it false is so low that the cosmetics industry, like I said, itself has asked for better standards. But it's not hurting me, so why wouldn't I just continue? So it's a waste of your money in many cases, and enables an anti-aging industry that potentially makes misleading claims. If you think that that's okay, that's fine, but from a regulatory standpoint, there's simply not enough evidence. If you still have questions, if you want to know how to get more information, feel free to reach out, feel free to leave a comment. Maybe I'll do a podcast on that. Stay tuned. Thanks, guys.
This is the Darshan Talks podcast, regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com.